Welcome everyone. This is Jing Dane. I am a program manager at the International Women's Media Foundation. We're hosting a series of webinars on reporting during COVID-19 to help reporters, editors, newsroom leaders to understand how covering this pandemic impacts the physical and the mental health, as well as risk management and planning. To find more information, please follow the IWMF on social media. And the first webinar in the series, we'll have Dr. Katherine Porterfield. She is a consulting psychologist at the Bellevue NYU Program for survivors of torture. She provides clinical care for over 20 years to individuals and families who survived the torture and refugee trauma. She has also been a longtime consultant for the International Women's Media Foundation and has treated many journalists in our field for trauma-related issues. She will conduct the 75 minutes webinar on strategies for managing the stress of current coronavirus crisis. And Dr. Porterfield will provide a frame of the biopsychological impact of this situation, and we'll discuss strategies of self-assessment, finally designed to help us recognize where and how we are manifesting signs of stress. Later, Dr. Porterfield will also discuss strategies of well-being and coping in this difficult time, including enhancing empathy for ourselves and others. We will have this webinar recorded and uploaded immediately after this. So you can find a link later on our Twitter and other social media platforms. At the end of this webinar, we'll take questions, so please post the questions in chat or Q&A sections, and we'll get to them later. So Kate, I'll let you take away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jin, and welcome to anybody tuning in or watching this later. It's a very, very much of an honor to be hosted by the International Women's Media Foundation, who I've been working with for years and such a fan of the work that you all are doing. So a special thanks to IWMF and especially to Jin Ding for getting this together. What I thought we'd do for the next 75 minutes is I just want to share some perspective and some strategies and a frame that I've found very helpful in my work with trauma survivors to try to apply it to the current situation, to the enormous and unprecedented stress that folks are feeling in the present situation. I know there's a lot of journalists tuning in. This isn't specifically focused on journalism as much as it's really focused on, in general, as people, how to enhance our well-being during this very, very difficult time. Though, of course, great recognition to journalists, those of you covering and going out into the field and facing the direct front lines of seeing and reporting on this situation. So I'm going to start. I just want to begin by saying, this presentation is not a clinical intervention. This is not a substitute for getting professional help. If you are in need, you absolutely should be turning outward to the many resources in the communities around the country and hopefully around the world. Obviously, therapy is available to folks, clinics, emergency rooms. If you are in severe distress, absolutely reach out to 911 or an emergency service and get that help. But there's also a phone line I put in here for, in the US, SAMHSA's disaster distress hotline. And at the end, I'm also going to provide some resources regarding finding therapy. So the goal today really is, there's a couple things I'd like to share. I want to try to provide a frame for managing the stress and uncertainty of the coronavirus situation that we're in. I'm going to talk very briefly about a model that I really like to use with my clients who've survived trauma, which is a biopsychosocial model, understanding the impact of trauma on us as organisms. Then I'm going to talk about another frame that I find very helpful, which is a self-assessment frame that lets us check in on our own well-being and stress. And then the third piece of that is using that self-assessment to then create a biopsychosocial well-being plan for ourselves, an intentional plan that we use, particularly when we are under such severe stress. So to start, I just want to say in my work over the last 20 years with survivors of severe trauma, I've really learned a lot. I've been very privileged and very fortunate to be at the Bellevue NYU Program for survivors of torture in New York City, and then to work with groups like IWMF and the DART Center. One of the things I've learned is that for people who've survived something extraordinary or been through something extraordinary, a frame often helps them. And by a frame, I sort of mean a way you put it together for yourself in terms of meaning. So the idea of, this thing happened to me, or these things affected me in these ways. This helped me during it and after it. And this is how I changed and grew from it. And again, that's not all to say that it's all positive a frame and it's all about, I grew and I did great. It's not. There's a lot of pain in the work we have to do after living through something traumatic and overwhelming. But I do want to argue today that having an intentional process of meaning making and creating a frame for yourself can be helpful. So let's just start briefly with what the term we're going to see a lot during this next hour, which is the biopsychosocial imprint of trauma. And let me explain what I mean by that. First of all, as people, as organisms, mammals, I'm arguing today about the bio, psycho, and social parts of us. And those are just dimensions or domains of being. They're not all the ways that we are human. We have, there's a spiritual domain for folks. There is cultural. There's a lot of other ways people exist and function. But today we're going to focus broadly on these three domains: the biological, which is our body, this vessel that carries us around, and what this body does to both function normally and to protect us during stress and after stress. We're going to talk about the psychological, and again, very broadly, what I mean by that is thoughts and feelings, the way our mind creates meaning and creates language and ideas and has feelings that we carry and react to. And by social, I mean very literally the social aspect of being a human being, that essential part of us that is, by the way, wired into us, which is that we need to connect to each other and we must have this contact and connection in order to grow healthily. The social is as central to us as the care and feeding of the body. So talking about trauma a little bit, the way, most of us in this work think about trauma is it's an experience or experiences that overwhelm the organism that's suffering it. So in other words, we have a normal kind of set of strategies that we use, some of which are conscious, meaning we think about them, and others happen naturally in our bodies. And when those coping strategies and those adaptations stop working or can't work as well or as effectively, it usually means we are becoming overwhelmed with a situation. So when you think about trauma, which is overwhelming our ability to function or to deal, to cope, you want to be thinking about the exposure. What is it that we're being exposed to? What is the actual stuff that is scaring us or frightening us or overwhelming us? And then how much and how frequently is that happening? That's the dose. And that exposure and dose of trauma matter in terms of how hard it is then to recover from, and how much the body and the mind actually have to make kind of long-term changes to adapt to it. So obviously, again, broadly, more severe trauma and more repeated trauma and longer lasting trauma can leave a stronger and more difficult imprint on the organism, on us. Now, this is not a neuropsychological lecture, and that's not my expertise, and there's fantastic stuff online and many great books. I really recommend the work of Dr. Stephen Porges, Dr. Ruth Lanius, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, Dr. Judith Herman. These are just eminent leaders in the field who can talk about these issues. So briefly, what I'm talking about is that the trauma reaction that we're going to think about today is a reaction in which our nervous system has had to activate or kind of slow us down to deal with what's coming at us. And I'm talking about the stress of this current situation, the stress of this pandemic, and the sort of endless exposure we're having to it, depending on where we are and what our experience is. So just broadly, our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, that's our nervous system that operates involuntarily. We don't make this nervous system do what it does. It does it automatically rather. There's a sympathetic component to it, sympathetic nervous system, and then the parasympathetic nervous system. And these two parts of our autonomic nervous system are operating all the time in normal life as well. And the sympathetic nervous system is part of what helps us be alert and aroused. And when we are overwhelmed or under threat, that sympathetic nervous system strengthens its reaction in our body and creates bodily adaptations to protect us. So if something's coming at me, if a car were coming at me, if some kind of animal was about to attack me, involuntarily my body would shoot itself full of what is necessary to make me fight or flight, right? Run or get out of the situation physically with my own defense. That's heart racing, that's lungs giving us more oxygen, that's pupil dilation. All of these things are autonomic and they happen involuntarily when we're under threat. Now, the flip side is that the parasympathetic nervous system, which remember has to do with lots of other normal parts of our functioning, sexual activity, digestion, rest. But if the threat that is coming at a person is too severe, too long-lasting, and ultimately inescapable, then often that parasympathetic nervous system starts taking over from the activated hyper-aroused part and starts to bring down and shut down the organism's perceptions and experiences of the environment. In other words, that things are too much, I cannot escape, and my system starts to shut down. Now, this can result in what's called dissociation, where people really detach from their perceptions, from their feelings, from their thoughts, from their sense of self, or it can be more of a shutdown that is more subtle than that, or it can result in what's called a real faint reaction, where the person absolutely loses consciousness. Now, why am I sharing all this? Because this nervous system activation and this nervous system shutdown are normal processes, and under stress, you can actually be aware of them a bit and observe them in yourself, so that when you are struggling, you can consciously make choices and decisions to respond to them. And my patients tell me over the years that it's really helpful to understand the nervous system, because it helps them learn what protected them when they were being frightened or when they were being hurt. And one of the things I really recommend is learning to be grateful and thank our body and thank our brain for what it does to protect us. We'll talk about that a little later as a little technique I recommend. So when you're talking about stressful things happening, what you're thinking about is, what's this window of tolerance? That's the phrase that gets used. And we'll look at this little chart for a minute, where I'm going to be doing okay. And if you look at this chart for a second, I'm going to give you a little minute to read it. If you look at this window of tolerance graphic, it shows that the sort of optimal state is that green part where we can think and we can feel. We're operating with engagement in our environment. If we start to move into that sympathetic nervous system arousal that I talked about, you're going into that red zone at the top, into hyperarousal. And that means you're becoming overreactive, over-aroused, and much less able to think, plan, and make decisions. You are in a distressed state. And going down to the bottom of the graphic, to the hypoarousal, if your defensive system, your nervous system that we just spoke about, is moving more into a parasympathetic stance, you begin to be more low energy, more low in your movement capabilities, muscle movement, lethargic, less feeling, and in some ways unmotivated. So you can see that this window of tolerance, which later we're going to talk about, assessing how am I doing in this moment? Where am I in my window of tolerance? Am I in a state of optimal doing okay? Or am I actually a little jacked up? Am I a little uncomfortable? Or am I a lot shut down and I need to go lie down? So we're going to talk about assessing that. But what I want you to understand is that this process of our arousal system responding is not just a black or white situation. It has a range and a nuance to it that you can be aware of in yourself. And that the stressful situation you're in is likely putting you into some of these states of the red zone and in the gray zone on this chart. And it's good to be aware of it. So what does trauma do? Well, trauma, again, an experience of being overwhelmed, frightened, terrified, makes our brain adapt to this stress and our body. So remember, we talked about that heart rate, your oxygenation in your lungs, your pupil dilation, your digestive system actually responds. Those reactions, which happened because we were stressed, are then remembered. They're remembered by the body. They're remembered in the brain. Our nervous system, leaves imprints in our memory system. And so after trauma, unfortunately, people feel sometimes that there is the same kind of experience coming back to them in their body. And so therefore, that leads to what is often that uncomfortable post-traumatic experience that people have of body reactions of fear, painful images and memories, and social isolation. So why am I sharing this right now? Because we're thinking about a current state that we're in that has been very uncharacteristic and like nothing we've experienced before. And so I'm arguing that we want to be having a way of thinking about it for ourselves that helps us feel that we understand at least what's going on and can do something for ourselves when needed. So coronavirus, I'm not going to make a big argument as to whether or not it's a trauma. I mean, I think it's obvious at this point how massively destructive and disruptive this is to, globally. There is a direct impact, obviously, that I think is quite traumatic for the patients and families suffering it. Healthcare workers across the board, from medical through folks running hospitals in all the most essential ways, first responders, service industry folks, keeping stores open, keeping delivery services happening, and of course journalists, many of whom I know are on this, watching this, this program today. Journalists out there, reporting from hospitals and from situations in which they're seeing distressing situations. So obviously that's what we call direct impact. More secondary impact starts to move, back a bit. People watching the news, seeing the images, feeling worry for themselves and for others. And in fact, quarantine I included as a kind of stressor here, because there's a recent study just came out from the Lancet that's looked at past studies of folks' reactions to quarantine and found, in fact, that people who had been through quarantine did show psychological stress reactions in the aftermath, and sometimes for quite a long time. Reactions of stress in the moment, but later problems with anger, confusion, depression. So we need to be thinking of quarantine as its own stressor. And then just to underscore, for those who have other traumas in their lives or in their past or struggling with mental illness, all of this can be more intense and can exacerbate prior conditions. So we're all of us adapting to this very stressful, very frightening situation. So what does that mean? Okay, well, let's think about what some of the signs of that biopsychosocial stress reaction can be on us. And a lot of this might seem common sense. And what I want you to be thinking about towards the second part of my talk is that you're going to be thinking about, how am I doing? Am I having these reactions? And if so, what are the signs that I'm having them? And what can I do to address them? So in the biological, there's quite a few indicators of a stress reaction that take place in our body. Everything starting with fatigue and sleep problems, which are quite common. Especially a lot of people I'm hearing from are talking about a lot of sleep difficulties. Difficulty concentrating, paying attention, feeling on edge and jumpy. Think about, by the way, that sympathetic nervous reaction we talked about, which is your body activating for threat. So in the aftermath, and by the way, with this situation, there's not really quite an aftermath right now. We're really in it. That activated feeling leaves you to feel on edge, perhaps a little jumpy, and I'm talking about your body now, body showing signs of being hypervigilant. Trouble breathing is a sign of a stress reaction and can, of course, right now be highly triggering for people given the symptoms of the virus. Aches and pains, headache, body ache, stomach distress, very common in folks who have been through traumatic stress to have what we call somatic symptoms in their body. And then feeling spacey and disconnected, also considered at times a biological reaction, moving, remember, towards that dissociation I talked about, that parasympathetic reaction of being shut down. But people really feel it in their body, sometimes almost as if they're not in their body. Let's move to look at some of the psychological signs. Obviously, sadness, despair, anguish, so much of that being spoken about, being written about. Anxiety, just huge. Again, everyone I'm talking to who is talking about what they're struggling with talks about worry and anxiety. change meanings about the world. This can be something that happens after too much stress and trauma, which is a feeling of that you really think about things differently. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Images or thoughts coming to you unbidden can be a sign of a stress reaction, things that you are, sort of feel like just come into your mind. Sense of dread or foreboding about what's coming. And self-attack might seem like, well, where's that come from? But in fact, under situations of stress, people who have vulnerability, maybe previous stress or previous struggles in this area, report, I'm feeling down about myself. I'm attacking myself. Why am I not handling this better? Why am I not handling my workload or my school load during this? Why am I not productive or motivated? People really talk about that. And it is a sign of a psychological reaction to too much stress. Social stressors or social consequences of stress. Obviously, people feeling isolated can happen after stress and trauma. Feeling irritable and anger is a really common one, and so many people have that and then feel bad afterwards. People withdrawing from others, feeling misunderstood. We're going to talk later about the kind of mismatch that can happen during this current situation where you talk to someone and feel like you're not clicking. Feeling lonely, and by the way, isolation is a component of this that we are living with. And so it is exacerbating a natural stress reaction, which is to feel sometimes isolated and lonely. And even feeling frightened of other people, which unfortunately can be a response to trauma, and in the current environment can really be exacerbated by folks' fears of being infected. Okay, let's talk then about, we're talking about what stress does to us, right? Let's be aware then of what stress is doing to ourselves. Let's look at our own functioning and make that a part of our toolbox during this incredibly difficult time. So let's go back to that biopsychosocial, right? We're going to now self-assess, and self-assess just means you're going to take a picture of yourself. You're going to look at yourself in the domains and really notice how you're doing. Where am I struggling? Where am I doing okay? So when you talk about self-assessment, you're going to see this chart a couple times in this talk, and we're going to fill it with different material. Right now, I've put in a couple questions that you can ask yourself as part of your own self-assessment. So let's start with the biological. And again, I'm going to give you a second to look down that column. These are questions we can ask about our body, just starting with the body. How am I feeling? Literally, describe it, write it down. Am I in pain? Am I fatigued? Do I actually feel okay today, better than yesterday? What is happening in my body? Describe it to yourself. Do I have uneasiness or anxiety in my body? Do I feel distress in my stomach? We're staying in the biological column here. Am I rested and fed? Thinking on the positive side there. How did I do today with my food, my hydration, and my rest? Did I take care of myself? And am I feeling pleasure? And you're going to hear me a couple times in this talk about pleasure, but it's really important during this that if possible, obviously not possible when you are in the midst of the very severe parts of this situation. If you're ill, this could be very difficult. But if you are trying to have moments of pleasure, moments of peace that are enjoyable to your body, looking at the psychological self-assessment, we can ask ourselves, what am I feeling? Literally naming emotions. What is this feeling I'm having? I feel scared. Or today, I feel sad. I am grieving what I didn't get to do. There were things I was going to do this month that aren't going to happen. We're going to talk later about grief. Moving from feelings, what are my thoughts? Now this is different, right? Feelings can be sometimes a word, right? I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm scared. Thoughts can be a sentence, right? Think about what sentence is going through my brain right now. Is the sentence, this is never going to get better? Oh my God, everything's ruined in my life. Okay, that's a thought, and it's a thought that deserves some attention so that you can see if you can relieve that a little. Am I thinking in an overly global way? Now we're analyzing the thoughts a little, right? Is this thinking really the best and most accurate thinking I can be doing, or is it really going global? Everything is bad. What feelings are the hardest for me? Maybe ranking a little, like today I felt anxious, but honestly the hardest part was when I felt sad, missing my family members. That really felt sad to me. And also, again, am I having any pleasure? Is anything making me happy? Did I watch a video that made me laugh, or some animal videos on YouTube, or did I walk and feel the pleasure of the outdoors? Moving to the social self-assessment, who am I talking to? Who are my people? What am I feeling in relation? Noticing I'm feeling a lot of support from certain people, I'm going to move towards them. If I'm feeling not great with someone, what am I doing about that? Am I giving support and getting support? And later we're going to talk about turning outward. That's part of why this talk is called, making the world hurt less. It's not meant that this talk's making the world hurt less. It's meant that one of the ways we can sometimes ourselves feel less bad is when we turn and try to help others hurt less. So turning outward can be a really strong strategy for pausing and taking care, moving off a state of feeling negative yourself. Do I need something from people that I'm asking for? And am I having any interactions that are pleasurable or fun with other people? Again, looking for pleasure, looking for positive mood, positive states as well. Okay, let's go back to that window of tolerance a minute then and talk about self-assessment there, because you can do that in a moment even. You can say, I'm not feeling that good. What's going on? And you can say, okay, let's think about my arousal system. I know my arousal system can get kind of exacerbated or turned on by stress. I also know sometimes if I'm overloaded, my nervous system might be shutting me down a bit. I'm going to take notice of that. I work with my patients all the time on this very process. Notice where you are and name it. So when you feel anxious, I'm noticing I'm getting a little shaky. My stomach's distressed. I'm having feels like a roller coaster pit in my stomach. I think I'm moving into hyperarousal. What can I do about that? And a little later, we're going to do a couple very brief strategies of meditation and breathing to try to bring down that arousal a little bit. But you should also be coming up with your own and researching ways to bring down your arousal when you feel that way. Am I in the hypoarousal state and I'm going to bed? That might tell you, yes, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. I notice I'm lying down. It's okay. I'm going to let myself rest, but I'm going to notice it. So for instance, let's say you're having a moment. Let's do a quick example where you notice that things didn't go well. So with this example I made up, I don't have a sister. But in this example, I'm on the phone with my sister and we're talking about this situation and how we're both doing. And I talk about really feeling scared in that moment. I'm just really discouraged. I'm really upset. And she says something that kind of minimizes or suggests that I'm overreacting. She's clearly not where I am in that moment. So in that moment, I have a reaction. I yell at her. I say, you're being really stupid right now. I got to go. I hang up the phone and then I feel badly. And I end up kind of just noticing that my energy's down. I got a headache. I go to bed. I feel really cruddy. And the next day I just feel very down and kind of keep to myself. So let's self-assess that moment. Let's say, imagine that happened. And I said, all right, I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to notice what happened. What happened to me in the bio? What happened in the psycho? What happened in the social? Well, look, I was on the phone with her and I noticed as that conversation started, my stomach started to get nervous. I felt tense. I felt my face flush. It's body, bio. I noticed my voice started to get that little quiver that I get when I'm in conflict with someone, and I got a little voice raised. I also hung up and was sweating. That's very unusual for me. I don't usually do that in a phone call, right? I'm going to move to the second part of bio here. I also then that night had a headache. I actually had pain and felt fatigued, probably from that heightened sense of arousal and conflict that went through my body. And then I went to bed. I assessed my psychological. I say, well, what happened to me? I got anxious because we were talking about the corona situation. Then I felt angry and a little sad that my sister was not matching me. I was angry though that I was mostly feeling not heard. And then I felt ashamed right after I yelled at her. And then I was now struggling with shame. Then I noticed I got in bed and I started to have really negative thoughts. This situation is never going to get better. It's going to ruin relationships. My relationships are bad already and they're going to get worse. That kind of global thinking. And then the next day I still was having sad feelings and hopeless feelings. So observing a minute the social, what happened interpersonally when I was on that call? I had a mismatch. She was not in a place I was. Her defenses in that moment were in a more protective mode for her. She didn't want to go to that place that I was going. And so I had a reaction. I manifested it interpersonally with a flash of anger. So that's what happened to us in the actual communication. And then later, let's say I sent her a text where I said, you were insensitive and you do this a lot, and she didn't answer. So now the interpersonal's gotten even worse because the communication has led to further alienation from each other. I isolated then. So remember, the communication gets me to feel bad. Then I get isolated and I go to bed. I don't talk about it. And I don't even tell anyone the next day. So what I've just done is I just said, okay, I'm willing to self-assess this thing that happened. And what do I discover about myself? And what I want to argue to you is you can do that in all kinds of ways. You can do that in an interaction you have with someone. You can do it just in a state of feeling you're having. I'm going to break this down a little. How's my body? How are my thoughts and feelings? And what am I doing interpersonally? And you can do it more globally too. When you self-assess, you then tune into yourself a little, and then you can make adjustments, which are the parts that I'm hoping will be helpful to you and can be part of coping during this. So let's talk now then about all that self-assessment and how it can work towards creating a well-being plan, an intentional plan for yourself. So look, if you want to create a well-being plan, it's an active, intentional process. It's not just on the fly. And it's, you know, I tell journalists a lot when I work with them and other folks working in challenging, deadline-based, in the field kind of work, human rights activists, medical providers, you got to think of this in some ways like physical therapy. If something's hurting or starting to not do well in your body, you have to pay attention to it, and you have to carefully tend to it, and you've got to regularly work to heal it. And some of that work is rest, and some of that work is active healing processes. So that's the same with our feelings and our body during stress. We have to be attentive, and we have to be intentional. Back to biopsychosocial. How do we attend to our body, our thoughts and our feelings, and our interpersonal domains, our world? Well, there's a couple suggestions I'm going to make in this new chart here about ways to, ideas for thinking about well-being. And then I'm going to give you a couple specific suggestions that are techniques. So again, let's start with the bio. So pace. What am I doing to pay attention to how much I am resting, how much I'm recreating, and how much I'm working or being inundated with things that are hard? Now, work, by the way, is not always negative. I don't mean to say it's either that work is bad and then rest is good. I think for many of us, work is very fulfilling and in some ways quite distracting right now. But what is your pace? Are you taking any notice at all of how much time you spend towards work versus rest and pleasure? Body care, again, being attentive, not just on the fly, paying attention to your sleep, your feeding and what you put into your body, including substances. Am I being healthy with what I'm using in my body? And exercise. What is this vessel that has taken such good care of me, right? This vessel that right now is taking care of you. This vessel, are you taking care of it? Techniques for managing anxiety. Those can be a very conscious part of your well-being plan. I can't tell you how many people are talking to me about their yoga they're doing, their other exercise programs, but especially things that have to do with wellness and mindfulness and meditation. By the way, lots of things you read in the paper these days will say, like, do breathing or do mindfulness. And I always wish they'd say a little more as to why, because the why is you're teaching your nervous system, right? You're teaching your body, it's okay. We can calm down in this moment. And we're going to have a specific meditation we're going to do in a couple minutes that's specifically designed to say, in this moment, we're going to try to stay calm. So breathing, we'll work on for a minute. Grounding, we're going to talk about, and then pausing, just literally using pause as a word you say to yourself, and meditating. A couple other bio well-being things I recommend. Again, toxin, just watching what you're putting in. It's so hard sometimes, but watching, alcohol, drugs, nicotine, sugar, watching how much you're putting them in. And then that bottom line, you're going to hear from me all the time on the end of these charts, pleasure. Are you finding pleasure for your body? Listening to music, being in nature, letting there be touch in your body that is healing and loving, putting in healthy food. These are important ways we take care of our body. What about that psychological well-being? Okay, first of all, practicing naming feelings and then letting thoughts and feelings pass, which is to say, I see that I feel sad right now and I accept it. I also recognize it will pass, right? So this is a much more complicated theorizing can be said about this, because it's a really wonderful way to work therapeutically. And if you're interested, you might want to look up acceptance commitment therapy. But it really is a technique of all kinds of therapies, cognitive behavioral, as well as folks doing more what we call psychodynamic, which is learning to name our feelings and notice them and accept them. The next column, noticing those thoughts, different, right? So my feelings are one thing, I am sad, but the thoughts, because what we've learned is that bad mood sort of anchors on to bad thoughts. And you find yourself having these dark thoughts about the future, yourself, I'm a failure, whatever. And it often is that, if I step back, what is my mood right now? They are connected. Noticing when you self-attack and learning to stop it with self-empathy. We're going to talk about empathy a little later if we can. But the idea of saying to oneself, this is so hard, and I'm going to be kind to myself, and I'm going to be loving to myself when I'm going through something hard. Noticing behaviors that you're doing that are worsening your thoughts. I know now it's kind of like looking at a circle, right? Feelings, thoughts, behaviors. But hey, I'm watching the news all the time, and then I'm having conversations that aren't good. Maybe it's that the news, that behavior, is making me feel bad and then making me have interpersonal reactions that don't feel great, or interpersonal interactions that don't feel great. Finally, noticing pleasurable or positive thoughts. Oh, this feels nice. I'm laughing at this video. My kids and I are playing a game and we're really enjoying it. Finding a minute to sit in pleasure. Enhancing well-being through our interpersonal. Conscious awareness and noticing of who are my people. Who are my personal people? Who are my professional people that I trust and can turn to? And noticing those different categories and being aware of them. Asking for help and practicing it. Hey, I could use 20 minutes right now. Can you just give me a pep talk about this situation? I don't even mean about necessarily pep talk about the current situation, but I mean of coronavirus as much as maybe saying, hey, can I run something by you work-wise? And just like we think about it together. Turning outward. Again, we'll talk about that briefly at the end, but the turning outward as an actual intentional step to help create healing outside of you, outward facing, as a road towards feeling better internally. Catch yourself isolating, notice it. It's really interesting if we say, this is funny. I haven't called anybody in a day. I wonder why. And finding ways to have pleasure with people. Okay, so I've thrown out there kind of a broad list of ways one can enhance well-being. So now let's think about some techniques, because what I want to add to your repertoire for the next like 5 or 10 minutes is 3 techniques that are very simple, and maybe they're not for everybody. So if you don't care for these, that's cool. But they can sometimes be helpful. And again, I've had patients for many years talk about these as really helpful strategies. Again, none of these techniques are, we're not doing clinical work right now on this call. I'm not proposing that this is going to end major distress. These are just things to add to your repertoire of calming and calming in your toolbox. First thing I want to talk about is breathing. And I'm going to give you a brief right now example of a breathing technique that really can be helpful to folks to sort of settle a little and calm down. So I'm actually going to ask you right now to try this on this webinar. So I want you to, whatever position you're in, try to sit up and put your feet flat on the ground. And we're going to take our hands and put them on the top of our thighs. And you should sit there for a minute and just feel your hands on your thighs. And we're going to talk about breathing and grounding right now. And the position we're in physically is going to be our grounding position right now. And the grounding position is an open position where you're really aware of your environment in all the sensory ways that you can be. And for this focus, we're just going to be aware especially of sitting in our chair, hands on our legs, loosening up our torso a little bit, opening up that rib cage, relaxing your shoulders, and letting yourself be in a state of gentle, relaxed, but aware physicality, okay? So what I want to teach you now is a very simple breathing technique. I use a 4-4-4. There's a lot of breathing stuff recommended online, so try one that you like. Some people use a 4-7-8. But essentially a 4-4-4 technique is a technique in which you breathe in through your nostrils for a slow 4 count. You hold for a 4 count, and then you breathe out through your mouth for a 4 count. So you're kind of thinking of that air as traveling this way. And that process of 4-4-4 allows you to slow down your heart rate. And what's actually been shown is that folks who use this frequently, then when you use it in times of stress, it actually kind of triggers a better response, response to your body calming down quicker because you've been training your body. So let's just practice now. again, in that comfortable, grounded position, feet on the ground, and just follow my voice. Maybe close your eyes if that would be helpful. We'll do a couple of these. You're going to breathe right now. You're going to start. We're going to breathe in through our nostrils. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to pause. 2, 3, 4. Exhale slowly through your mouth. 2, 3, 4. Let's try it again. Breathe in through our nostrils. 2, 3, 4. Pause. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Do one more. In through your nostrils. 2, 3, 4. Pause. 3, 4. Exhale through the mouth. 2, 3, 4. Try this. Try it over time. You can do this any place. And if you don't care for it, that's fine too. But I recommend you try it and see if you find it useful. Other techniques I want to talk about. Visualization, we probably won't spend a lot of time on that, but if I can get to it, I will. But visualization is, again, just creating your own practice of trying to envision, imaginally, things that are peaceful to you, things that make you feel happy. Some people pick a spot, pick a beach spot, for instance, they like, or a mountain. Other people like to picture something more like clouds, where you picture those clouds and let them move across your visual, your imaginal space. We can talk about that if we have time a little later, because what I'd like to spend time on now for a minute is grounding. Grounding we just started with, so we're going to go back to it. And grounding is something that can be used in conjunction with breathing or not. We use this a lot. I use this a lot with folks I work with in prison, where you find yourself feeling overwhelmed. Remember that window of tolerance, you're getting anxious, you're getting a little too aroused, or you're feeling shut down, lethargic. Both those sides of the window of tolerance can be responsive to grounding. You're going to place your feet flat on the ground. We're going to open up our torso and let that rib cage feel like it's open and also in a resting position. Our shoulders are down, not up tight. And you're going to take those palms, put them on the top of your thigh, and just for a minute, I want you to just listen to my voice. Again, you might want to close your eyes. I want you, as you're sitting here, to just focus on your sensory perceptions. Focus your thoughts on what you're feeling in your body. Feel your hands against your legs or your pants or your dress, and feel that fabric. Feel your feet on the ground. Really push for a minute and let yourself feel that feeling of feet hitting the ground. I feel that the strong, flat ground beneath me. You should feel that. It's very, very much of a holding space, the ground. As you're feeling your feet on the ground, you're feeling your hands on your legs, be aware of other parts of your body. Take in your breathing now. Letting yourself practice very gradually the 4-4-4 breathing pattern. And maybe even now open your eyes and be aware of your surroundings a second and just look at 3 items that you're going to take notice of in your surrounding. 3 things. Just notice them. I notice the texture of them, the color, the light, noticing where you are. And that right now you're safe and you're present. And you might even, if you practice doing this, say something to yourself like, I'm feeling my feet on the ground. I'm here right now. I'm safe. I'm in this moment. The ground is strong beneath me. And I'm sitting here strong. So this, again, takes more time, takes more practice than I'm able to do with you right now, but I want to encourage you to try it. I've done this with groups of people where we've been in stressful situations together and we've done a group version of this. People can find that very, very comforting. And you can definitely do it by yourself. Now, a couple other techniques I just want to talk about. First of all, getting outside and breathing the air, just literally breathing that air and saying to yourself, this is oxygen. This is oxygen. Can feel very calming. Now, if you're having trouble breathing, you really should not rely on these kind of techniques. It's probably better at that point to try to stay calm, but see if you do need to reach out to someone, if you need to talk to your doctor, or you need to go and be seen. If you're really short of breath, you have to take care of yourself bodily. But if you're more having discomfort and you're having anxiety, sometimes that shortness of breath can get calmed by grounding, by doing breathing techniques. But again, if you have any history of panic or panic disorder, these are not techniques I would really recommend. I would recommend you use the clinical work that you can do with a therapist around panic disorder and panic symptoms. I want to talk briefly about finger holds quickly, and then we'll move on to finishing up here. By the way, before I go to finger holds on this slide, I just see, once again, pleasure and laughter, very, very good for us, good for our body to feel the chemical reactions that come with bodily pleasure, with laughter, with human connectivity. Those are really, truly bodily healing processes when we laugh, when we feel pleasure, when we feel love. Thanking your brain and body. I mentioned this earlier. I'm a huge believer in thanking our the parts of ourself and the people in our lives and the world around us, being grateful for this body that's carrying you right now and holding you. And that is helping you in stress. Even if you're getting messages from your body of anxiety, that is also your body trying to say, and your brain saying, hey, we got to be careful. We're not feeling good. So remember that those processes of arousal, they're not all bad. They are also our body's adaptation to a hard situation. All right, let's do finger holds now. And finger holds is, again, not for everybody. So if you don't love this, that's okay. This is what I think of as an emotion-based meditation. There's some writing on it. I have a reference at the end of the talk for a group called Capacitar, a wonderful group who treats refugees. And they have a wonderful guidebook that walks through finger holds. Finger holds are essentially a meditation where you focus on your feelings. If you're having some emotional distress about whatever, and you basically, I'm going to show you a little picture here. You use your hand to be the location of different feelings, and you notice the feeling, accept it, and try to then just take a moment to imagine the feeling being released. Imagine the feeling going away just for the moment. It doesn't mean you're saying these feelings are bad. I'm going to make them go away forever. It's just a meditative way to say, I accept this feeling, I notice it, and in this second, in this moment, I'm going to try to release it into the earth. So it, again, it's a little bit of a, it's a theoretical way to think about releasing feelings. But I think that it can be helpful. I find people like this. They use it sometimes in bed at night if they're having trouble falling asleep. I have folks who've been in prison who use this when they're feeling anxious. You can use this on airplanes. You can use it on trains. You can use it anywhere because people don't really notice that you're doing this. So what you're going to do for this, I'm just going to do a very brief version. I apologize, but please look at the manual at the end that mentions Capacitar if you want a longer description. What you basically do is you hold each finger one at a time with a strong grip of your other hand. And believe it or not, you try to let yourself sort of think of that grip as a way that you are letting energy be released. And you feel the strength of your grip on each finger, and you think about the feeling that goes with that finger. And what you do then, I'm going to just show you the picture again, is we're going to go through the feelings. The thumb represents sadness or grief. The index finger is fear, panic. The middle finger, nicely, is anger. The ring finger is feeling anxiety, overwhelmed, like there's too much. And the pinky finger is often thought of as self-attack or feeling overwhelmed in myself. And so what you do literally to do the finger hold, and try to go along with me if you're interested in this right now. This will only take a minute or two. You're going to you're just going to listen to my voice, maybe close your eyes, and you're going to begin by gripping your thumb. And I want you to grip your thumb. And as you grip your thumb with a strong grip, I want you to try to feel there might be a pulse even. Let yourself feel that pulse and imagine the strength that is in your body. And we're focusing for this minute on sadness. And I'm holding my thumb and I'm imagining and noticing that there are things I feel sad about. And that sadness is real and it's okay. But in this little moment right now, as I feel the strength of my hand, I'm just going to imagine releasing the sadness just for this minute, just for now. And as I release that sadness into the earth, I recognize it, but I let it go for now. And you're going to try that if you're doing this on your own, maybe for a minute or two, just letting yourself feel that pulse. We're going to move to our index finger. I'm going to feel that strong grip because I'm strong. And I feel my skin on my skin. And I'm thinking about fear right now, and that there's a lot of fear that I feel. Sometimes strong fear. And I'm just going to let that pulse be present. And I notice that pulse. And we're going to imagine that that fear is being released for a minute, just for now, in this little moment, just letting the fear go. I'm going to move to my middle finger, recognize, notice anger I might feel right now. It's okay to feel it. I notice it. But as I feel the grip, I'm just envisioning for this moment, releasing the anger, and picturing it going into the earth, recognizing it's valid that I have that feeling. Go to a ring finger. I'm going to hold that finger and just think of, am I overwhelmed? I have feelings of really being overwhelmed right now. I get anxious. It's very difficult. As I feel that pulse, I say, okay, I know I have these feelings, but as I just feel my strong grip, I'm going to release it for just this minute, releasing anxiety. And that's okay. And finally, holding my pinky, feeling my strong grip, my skin against skin, and feeling that sometimes right now I'm struggling with feeling bad about myself or overwhelmed with myself or negative. I notice that. I'm just going to let it go in this moment. At this moment, I'm going to let it go. I know these feelings are valid and they can come back sometimes. So I know if you did that and didn't like it, you probably won't try it again. That's okay. But if you did it and you felt that it was a way to kind of have a meditation on feelings that you liked, then try it again and try it yourself. And the idea again is not that it's some magical release of feelings, but that it's a way to let yourself be intentionally thinking about your feelings, noticing them, and also having a moment of letting them pass. Okay, creating that well-being practice for yourself now. We're moving towards the last section here. Back to that chart, biopsychosocial. We're going to self-assess where I am feeling and manifesting the stress of this current situation we're in. Where is it in my body? Where is it in myself? And so here's your blank chart. And the idea is for you all to allow yourselves to, fill that out. Make one of those for yourself. Where am I feeling the biological stress of this situation? Again, you can do this in a moment. I actually like this for a moment, meaning you're having a bad time. Something really has gone wrong. I'm going to do this assessment right now. But also you could do it more broadly. In general, how am I handling the situation? So you do your self-assessment and you notice then that these are the things that come up for me that cause me trouble. I isolate, I get an uncomfortable feeling in my stomach, and then I, let's say I tend to then be irritable with people and my thoughts start to get kind of dark. That's like, let's say a pattern I've noticed. Now you can start to address those. You're going to make your well-being plan. Well, what does that mean? It means finding your own stuff that you're going to fill in where you say, this helps me when I do this. When I'm feeling a pit in my stomach, it helps to get away from the computer, to go sit on my porch, to breathe, to pet my dog, whatever. And you're going to create your own plan that is on these dimensions of biopsychosocial. And I'm going to encourage you to do that because I think it can be helpful. Your own wellness plan, you can use it in bad moments or you use it regularly, right? So let's do a practice one here. 5 times a day, I'm on my bio now. I will do that 5-minute breathing practice and I will stretch my body 5 times a day. I just have to build that in and I'm going to try it for a while and see how I do. I'm going to exercise 30 minutes every day, whether that's walking, running, whatever your exercise, but I'm really going to give 30 minutes to my body moving and being in a state of exercise. I'm going to drink water 5 times a day. I mean, sometimes little things like that really help you feel like I am being conscious of my body and my hydration and flushing things out. I like to think of water as flushing things out and oxygen as bringing in that clean, healthy air we need. I'm going to thank my body every day. I'm going to find some little moment where I thank my body and brain for what they're doing to carry me through this right now. Now, this is just obviously some made up ideas. You will have your own. Your psychological plan that you will use. How about saying that you're going to try to name feelings as you notice them? Good, bad, whatever, you're going to try to name them. I notice right now, I feel cruddy. Okay, what's cruddy? Cruddy is I feel kind of depressed because I'm really sad about missing a bunch of work things that I was really excited about. Or I feel sad that my kids aren't being able to do their school that they really love. So I'm going to name feelings. And then I'm going to notice the thoughts that go with it. So that's that slightly more, getting now into more complex parts of our cognition, which is, what are my thoughts? Are they matching bad feelings? So I'm in a bad mood. And so I start thinking, oh my gosh, my career's completely done and never going to return. Just noticing the connections and then analyzing a little bit for yourself, whether those bad feelings, bad thoughts, whether that match could be slightly loosened, could be disrupted a little. And so that it's not such a formula. I'm going to sit quietly and let thoughts pass. That's a psychological wellness plan. I'm going to sit and say, my thoughts are valid, my thoughts are real, but I'm going to let them pass. I mentioned visualization a little while ago, and visualization is a way sometimes people will do this with thoughts added with the visualization. So they might say the cloud thing I talked about, I'm going to picture clouds. I'm going to picture these clouds moving, and as they pass, each cloud might represent, a feeling I'm having or a thought, like, I don't feel good right now about myself. Okay, I'm just going to let it pass though. Right now, I'm not fighting it. I'm just letting it pass like a cloud passes. Again, there's a lot of, way more nuanced and detailed kinds of meditations that are available online. I have some resources at the end where people will take you through visualized meditation. So please, if you're liking this idea, follow it up. We live in a time of great resources, which is, by the way, one of the positive things to think about right now. Another psychological, strategy, I'm going to thank my mind, right? Thank my body, thank my mind. Not just my brain, my mind, the part of me that makes meaning. My social wellness plan, I'm going to reach out when I feel overwhelmed. I'm not going to isolate. I'm going to notice how I feel when I ask for help. I'm going to notice, oops, sorry about that. What does it feel like when I ask for help? Actually, it feels good. I'm going to focus on someone else every day intentionally. I'm going to find a way to do that, and on others who need something. And back to gratitude. I'm going to thank my loved ones. I'm going to thank somebody today for what they did for me. Now, again, this was sort of my ideas for some things. You will make your own. I want to hit a few other points and then give some time if we want for some comments or questions. First of all, sleeplessness. Look, it is really, really common in a time of high stress to struggle with your sleep. And we are hearing a lot of this from folks. And you really need to attend to your sleep. And what I'm about to talk about is not a sleep plan. If you are having chronic sleep trouble, you need to talk to someone, get some help, either from your primary care doctor or psychologist, psychiatrist, social worker. Talk about the sleep troubles if you're having them. Chronic sleep troubles can really wear us down and lead to other kinds of difficulties. But also recognize that right now it is somewhat expectable that there is some sleeplessness accompanying this very, very disruptive, terrible time. So it can feel disruptive. Practice what works for you and notice it. For instance, maybe staying in bed for some people and saying, okay, my body's resting. I'm not sleeping, but my body's resting. I've had patients where that is helpful to them, to just say, I'm resting, I'm not sleeping. Jumping down to that bottom bullet point, sometimes people say, and tomorrow I'll take a nap. Finding ways to just talk to yourself and say, it's okay in this moment, I'm not sleeping. Some people use a gradual progressive muscle relaxation in bed, which can be really helpful. Look it up online if you're interested. It's literally like starting with your toes and clenching and then moving up your body. And as you move up your body, you're clenching muscles and then also flexing and letting them then relax. People find that to be sometimes soothing. Using a visualization, you can make one up. I had a patient who used to envision a blender, and they'd picture the thoughts, they put all their thoughts in the blender, and then they picture it kind of whipping around into like a smoothie, and then they pour it out. Get out of bed and sit someplace quiet and read if that's helpful to you. Some people are screen people and they say, actually, I can look at a screen in bed and then I'll fall back to sleep. Maybe that's okay. I'm not giving you prescriptions here of what to do. What I want to help you see is that there are different strategies that we use, and you can assess them in yourself. And if they're not working, you will need to take notice of that and find a different strategy. Don't overuse alcohol. Unfortunately, so many of us, let's have that glass of wine because it chills me out at night. But then too much alcohol use, lots of reasons it's not good for you, but one of them is definitely can affect your sleep cycle. And then the last thing is just recognizing what we call horizontal thinking, which my wonderful graduate professor introduced to me. And the idea is that when we are lying horizontally, rarely are we having thoughts that are great for real life in both directions. And so if you are lying horizontally and thinking about something, chances are you're either, amplifying the negative and the catastrophic, or you might even be unrealistic in some other way if you're horizontal. But what I really want to think about is that when you're lying horizontal and worrying that everything is terrible and you're going to mess everything up and nothing's going to go right, it might be time to say, I think I'll revisit this tomorrow when I'm vertical, when I'm looking at light, when I've got, a cup of coffee or a cup of tea in my hand, or I'm with somebody I love. I think I might do better thinking about this tomorrow. Okay. Empathy. This could be so much to say about this, and that's not the focus of today, but part of when we came up with the title Making the World Hurt Less, as I said earlier, we were not suggesting that this conversation here is going to make the world hurt less, but that's a reflection in its double meaning that many patients frankly have said to me, which is that if we turn outward towards others, make others hurt less, we often then have some relief of our own pain and hurt. And I've certainly seen that with my very beautiful, wonderful patients over the years who have taught me that after the most severe pain and suffering, sometimes the thing that's best for you is to turn outward and connect with another person and hear their story or hear from them or talk to them and feel that connection, which is healing for you. So for me, I like to think of empathy as the modality, and that, like with breathing, sometimes you have to actually pause and say, am I in an empathic stance right now? Am I in an empathic state? And there's two ways I like to do this. First, towards others, which is I am in, let's say, a situation with a colleague, or let's go back to that example with the sister, and things are tense, conflict, it's not going right, I'm not feeling good. If I were to pause and really take an empathic stance, I mean a very active one. What is this person's experience right now? Do I understand it? Have I actually understood what they're going through, or even asked them to the point where I can reflect back and tell them what I hear them saying? Chances are not, because usually we don't really listen that well to each other. So if I can pause, imagine that other person's position, and maybe even try to open up dialogue about it, I'm now outward facing and trying to, and I'm looking towards their experience. And that can be an incredibly healing stance. Now, the harder one in some ways is empathy towards ourselves, really pausing when we are feeling negative, self-attacking, down, frightened, and saying, okay, how am I doing right now? What does this person, me, need right now? What if I treated myself with love and compassion during this stress, rather than treating myself harshly and with negative thinking and with bad treatment of my body? What if I try to really show that compassion to myself? Again, these are much grander thoughts and have been written and talked about by folks much better than I am right now. But if you're interested in them, I suggest you think about it and look into it. Pema Chodron writes beautifully about this. So there was someone else I was thinking of, I'll try to remember. So please, if you're interested in this, pursue it. It's actually, in my experience as a clinician, a very healing route is the route of empathy, turning outward towards other, and turning inward with self-compassion. Meaning making, I'm just going to say one thing on, which is, or two things, I guess, which is that, that brain of ours it's not just a brain, and it's a mind. And in the mind, we create meaning. And that's what we humans do. We just make meaning out of what happens to us and what we see and what we experience. And in this time of terrible stress, this time of really unprecedented fear in our world, our whole world, we are all making meaning all the time. So attend to your meaning, pay attention to it. Notice the meaning you're making, and notice the meaning your loved ones are making. You have children, maybe, listen to them. What are they saying about this? The meanings out of this, of course, are not all, many of them are frightening and negative and, point to scary things coming. But is there any meaning you're making that is positive? Is there any meaning you're feeling that is fulfilling? Meanings around what you've seen in other people, what you've seen in the human spirit, what you've felt from loved ones, what you've, been capable of yourself. Those meanings are important to us. And again, working with survivors of trauma, I've learned that even after the most severe kinds of suffering, including human cruelty, man-made cruelty, that when we can make meaning that is about loving others, about understanding others, or about growth that happened because of pain, it can really, really help us. Grief is another part of meaning making that is extraordinarily powerful right now. Many of us are grieving in the moment, as well as what is anticipatory grief. And I have an article I cited at the end here. My colleague, Dr. Emily Sachs, recommended this article. It's a really wonderful article about anticipatory grief. We are grieving what is coming and what we are losing in the future. And grief, while it is characterized by sorrow and anguish and sometimes very strong emotions, it is also a process of making meaning about a reality that has changed. And that doesn't have to be something you do alone, and it doesn't have to only be dark. So I want to end with some talking about therapy, and then if there's any comments or questions, maybe we'll be able to share a bit. Look, as I've said a couple times, this webinar is not a replacement for professional help. And if you are suffering, if you are struggling, absolutely get help. There are a lot of ways to do so. If you have your current therapist, keep going. Use teletherapy with your therapist, or find someone who does teletherapy. I actually included on here, if you see this bullet point, this is the practice guidelines of telepsychology. It's really, I put that in there so that you can see what psychologists are supposed to do in their teletherapy. It has everything to do with, from everything from ethics to paying to safety contracts, but it's very helpful. And you should know, what is your therapist doing in terms of following the standards of teletherapy. Ask the therapist, hey, what is your approach? I'd like to hear about it a little bit. Maybe you can have a consult ahead of therapy. Evidence-based practice, meaning, very well-researched techniques for anxiety and depression are out there. I mean, there's great treatment for cognitive, using cognitive behavioral techniques, using other methodologies, medication. So there is help for anxiety and for depression and for other mental illness, of course. APA has a help center, American Psychological Association, and a psychologist locator. And I apologize, I don't have the equivalent link for social work, and I'm sure there is such a thing. So don't be afraid to get help right now. This is an extraordinarily difficult time, and we need to come out of it okay. And we also need to be ready to help those who are in it in a deeper way right now and who are going to need our help down the road, because we know that that's coming. And we need to be able to turn outward to help others who are dealing with this now in more intense ways. Here's some resources I included. So hopefully I'm hoping you'll find them useful. And I'm gonna use a couple apps I've listed here, some other websites. This is that Capacitar, which has the finger holds and some other great strategies. What I'm gonna do right now is stop. And oh, you know what, before I stop, sorry about that. I'm gonna go right back a second there. I just wanna show one last slide, which is, there is a kind of, oops, hang on everybody. There we go. I did have one slide of sort of putting it all together into an image that I thought might be helpful, which is that you have your well-being practice that you're going to create. And it's all about being self-aware in the middle there, right? I'm looking at my own behaviors, feelings, experiences, interpersonal, and I'm going to use those to help design my practice. So I'm going to have my pacing. I'm going to know what is my pace of break, of recreation versus work versus pleasure and rest. I'm going to notice those breaks I need. I'm going to notice how much am I taking in traumatic material. You journalists on the call, I'm talking to you there. How much are you, really exposing yourself to a lot of material, images, stories? Are biological. How am I listening to my body? What am I doing with that rest and that nutrition and that hydration, that movement I need? Am I getting pleasure? And am I attending to my medical needs? Don't forget those during a time of stress. Psychologically, am I using any kind of mindfulness to be aware? How's that pleasure pursuit going? Am I finding places to reflect spirituality, creativity, arts, a routine that I create that helps me feel calmer, going out into nature to let my mind feel at peace, and using counseling or therapy or group therapy if needed, art therapy, dance therapy, movement therapy. And finally, that interpersonal, that social. What am I doing to process this? Who am I talking to? If you have someone it helps to talk to, keep talking to them. And when you're talking to them, say, hey, this really helps. I appreciate you. Is it helping you to talk to me? Because if not, let's figure that out too. Using therapy and healing, again, is obviously part of interpersonal healing processes that can come from all kinds of cultural backgrounds that people use. Using traditions and rituals that might feel helpful right now. Lots of graduations are going to be missed, lots of celebrations. Plan for a way to really interpersonally celebrate a birthday with someone who's far away. Do that graduation video you're going to do for your nephew or niece. Being creative with sharing our love and connection right now is really helpful. Pleasure, there it is again. Am I having pleasure with others? Am I helping other people? I've talked about that quite a bit, turning outward to have someone else hurt less. And asking for what I need. Am I being direct with folks? Telling folks what I need. So now I'm going to bring back the screen, and I'm hoping Jen is there.
Hi.
Hi, Jen. I know I've been talking a while. I don't know if we have any questions at all or any time for questions.
Yeah, we do have some questions. Let me read some to you and you can answer them. First, one is asking, do you think it's important that journalists also interact with people from other professions instead of just journalists about this topic? The culture in journalism profession isn't always open to a conversation about wellness.
It's such a good point. I mean, absolutely. Look, we all need to mix it up, right? And so, it's funny. It's very helpful to talk to my colleagues who are also clinicians, but, some of my most powerful conversations have been with, people who are not doing what I do for a living. I talked to a teacher, and it was just really interesting to hear a teacher talk about having to care for and educate kids in the middle of this. I found it really, really moving. And she also talked about where she's needing to take breaks. And it was just a total, we're both, caregivers in a certain way, but it was just very helpful to me. So I really do think right now, when you think about that biopsychosocial, mixing it up, finding people who you can relate to and who can open up your own experiences of this very, very devastating situation we're in. So yeah, mix it up. And then bring it back to your journalist friends, right? I mean, look, we all like to be able to talk the language of our field. So bring it back to your people in journalism, sure. But I think it's a great observation that we need to mix up the dialogue and mix up the vocabulary a little bit.
Yeah, the second question is there any literature you can recommend that is good introduction to acceptance and commitment therapy?
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have that up there, and I can find it and probably get it to IWMF. It's really easy to find. Acceptance commitment therapy is well documented. I'm blanking right now on the best resource, and I'm really apologizing for that. We can get that to you, and maybe Jen, maybe we could post it on there. It's a great work. It's not specifically the work I'm trained in. That's why I'm not giving you a great resource right now off the top of my head. But the folks doing it are really good. So I will get that resource to you. And again, the idea is this idea of the recognition of and learning to notice feelings while then working to understand them and find ways to recognize the validity of them, as opposed to stop that bad thinking you're having. It's a great kind of treatment.
Awesome. I also want to ask, I have chronic illnesses. How can I talk to my friends in a way that will make them understand that they need to be careful with their personal hygiene for the sake of other people? And how can I deal with people who are insensitive to my medical concern and my feelings?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great and important question. And again, let's think about the social, right? The interpersonal. Think about empathy. when you can enhance the empathy of another person towards you, you feel so much better. In other words, when you can say to a person, I need to ask you to understand something about me, and I'm wondering if I could talk about it, and then we could, process it a little. In other words, you're kind of saying, may I make you aware of what I'm struggling with? May I make you aware? May I invite you in? It's an invitation, right? And then the person, if you're lucky, and if you've chosen people well, and if not, by the way, you kind of might have to say to yourself, maybe this person is not the person for that conversation. But if you're lucky, then you can say, hey, can you tell me a little bit about what you heard me saying? And then I'd like to do the same for you. I'd like to hear, what do you feel about what I'm saying? And what's your experience of this? And what I'm basically talking about is that an empathic stance is one in which we open up our ability to hear each other and then reflect back. And I hit this note a lot in my work, which is reflecting back what we hear is so important. And when you have someone do it to you, it feels so good when someone's like, I want to make sure I heard you right. I heard you say you're feeling this and you're feeling vulnerable because of this. And that when I do this, it kind of makes that worse. And I want to be able to not make you feel worse. That's a beautiful expression of empathy. But I have to tell you, it takes work. So don't give up, guys. You have to teach. We have to teach each other to be empathic sometimes. I know we think it should be natural, but it's just not. We're all in a practice of empathy all the time, and it should always be an active practice. It's growing. It's not that, hey, I know how to be empathic, check the box on that one. So I would say open communication, asking for reflection back, and then asking for that person's own experience, and then you reflect it back. And most of all, take care of yourself and good luck.
That's great advice, Kate. One last question. I think this question is probably coming from all of us. That's how do we strike a balance between keeping ourselves informed and at the same time overexposing ourselves to too much news at this point that is detrimental for our mental health?
Absolutely. I mean, this is like the $1 million question, because we're all struggling with this. Lots and lots of people are struggling with this. You want to be informed, but are you noticing when you're getting overwhelmed? So my advice to you is think of that self-assessment, think of that biopsychosocial chart, and notice, okay, I am sitting on my phone right now, scrolling between, 3 news sites. I am having a pit in my stomach, bio. I am not wanting to talk to anybody, social, and I don't feel good. I feel anxious right now. Okay, those are 3 indicators that tell me something. Now I can be loving to myself and empathic and say, oh boy, Kate, I think you just overloaded. What could you do to address that? Or I can just keep going and just be like, well, this is the world and I got to know and I got to find things out. So I think you probably know by the end of this what I would suggest, which is I recommend you do pause, put it down, take a break, and then notice. I notice if I do this, like for me, I'll just personally, if I do the news late at night, it's very tough. I then feel bad going to bed. So I've been really trying to stop that and instead read a novel at night, or watch something fun with my kids. So you have to be vigilant to yourself. And I know for you journalists out there, it is your work. I really understand it. But if I can draw a parallel, my work is listening to the difficulties and struggles that people feel from having hard things happen, including what's happening now. That is deeply important to me. But it doesn't mean I never take a break from it. Because I know if I never take a break from it, I'm not going to be doing okay. So to you journalists, of course it's your work. Of course you've got to be, 360 view of what's happening. But you also need to, I recommend, put intentional practice in place where you notice your reactions and then build those firewalls, build safety for yourself, and real true pacing and breaks. I mean, that's mostly what I would recommend on that one. Probably not a surprising answer.
I think there is one last question. This is coming from like a feeling of there aren't enough people out there are showing empathy, and it's very depressing. And trying to offer my empathy to them and getting rejected is more depressing. So any advice on that?
Look, the practice of empathy, the practice of self-compassion, these are not quick processes. So you're absolutely right. It can be really difficult when you sort of think, I'm going to open myself up right now. And then what comes back at you is something, unsatisfying at least, or at the worst, hurtful. Those are the kinds of things that you have to begin to then open up about yourself. figure out, who am I asking for help from? Who am I turning to, right? Maybe I need to turn to someone different. An empathic practice doesn't just mean I'm like wide open for the whole world, and anybody who comes towards me, I'm going to be like, hey, this is what I feel. What do you feel? No, that's not empathic practice. Empathic practice has to do with recognizing your own experiences and validating them, and then choosing, because you did that self-assessment, who are the safe, loving, also compassionate and empathic people who I can do this with. And it is going to take practice, and you're going to fall down, and you're going to get hurt sometimes, but the building up that that can happen between people, the building up of trust and communication that can happen in a time of stress can truly be transformative. And we need that right now. We do all need to find ways to support each other and to receive support and to give support in loving, loving ways. So, you know, I just want to encourage you to turn outward and reach to others. And you will, I think, also find that that is in itself, in some ways, a healing process.
Thank you, Kate. So we ran through all the questions, and I really wanted to thank Kate on behalf of the International Women's Media Foundation for doing this webinar with everyone. And hopefully you all find this helpful. And we will be uploading this to our YouTube, and we'll be sharing that on our social media. So please share it with your friends, and let's make everyone feel better in our circle, at least. And hope everyone having a great day.
Thank you, Jen, and a special thank you to IWMF and to all of you out there. Just please take good care, everybody, and be safe.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.